Hello everyone, my name is Nathan. I'm a developer advocate here at Camunda, and today I want to talk about what is feel. This video in particular is meant for citizen developers, for users who are coming into Camunda but don't have a software engineering background. You don't have a lot of experience working with various programming languages, but when you come into Modeler and you're working with either DMN or with certain aspects of your BPMN model, you're going to need to write some expressions. For instance, with the XOR gateways, you're going to need to set an expression to decide which path you're going to go down. And in Camunda, we use feel for that. And so this video is really meant to be an introduction for those without a lot of software engineering background to what is feel and a real quick guide on how to figure out how to use it with a couple examples of using it in practice. As you can see on the screen here, I have our Camunda documentation up. You can always go to docs.camunda.io to look any of this up whenever you want. Oops, let me go back. And you can see here that feel stands for the friendly enough expression language. And that's exactly what it tries to achieve. It tries to be very friendly without a lot of mental cycles to try to figure out exactly what you want to do. When you're working with some programming languages, they have a lot of dots or braces or brackets or require semicolons in certain places. And feel is a lot more forgiving than that. And when you're writing a feel expression, it sounds a lot more like spoken word, like an instruction that you would give as you spoke it out loud, as opposed to a machine type command that you might type in a programming language. So to kind of give a quick introduction to feel here, the first thing I want to talk about are some of the data types that are available. When you're working with any sort of programming language, they support different data types. There's as we're going to see here, there's numbers, there's strings, there's lists, there's arrays, there's objects. And feel has a couple specific names for that and a couple specific ways that it deals with it. So I want to run through this list very briefly, spend about a minute on this. The first one is null. Null is no value. There's not a variable present, or the variable has no value. Everything comes out as null. Null is also important to remember because in certain operations, for instance, if you try to add a number to a string as like an arithmetic operation, it will come out as null rather than throwing an error. We also have number. Within feel, all numbers are represented by the single number type. It doesn't matter whether it has a decimal or whether it's a whole number or not. And of course, it supports signed and unsigned, which means negative and positive numbers. We have strings. Strings are represented within double quotes, and it's basically an alphanumeric string. So if you think of a standard line of text from any sort of document, that would be a string. And then we have a Boolean. Boolean is true or false. So is it true? Is it false? That's all it is. We also support dates in specific formats, times, and we support date-time format, so that is a date-time combination. Can include a time zone with that as well. And we also support durations, durations in the time of days, hours, minutes, seconds, as well as months and years, actually. We're not going to go over the date, time, and duration today. That's a little bit deeper than I want to go. We're going to look at the other objects first, of which there are two more as we get to the bottom of the list here. First, we have list. If you do have a little bit of experience with other programming languages, a list in feel is an array. The notation for that is using these square brackets, and then you have a comma-separated list of values inside of it. And those particular values can be of any other type that's valid within feel. So you can see here that we have a list of numbers, we have a list of strings, or we have a list that contains another list, and then a string, and then this is actually two lists in and of itself there as well. So a list is very flexible for containing a long sequence of elements. And last, we have the context. In my experience working with Camunda and BPMN, context is probably the most common of the more complex types that you're going to encounter, because when you receive a response from a REST API, for instance, or if you have a webhook within your process, the data that comes in will often be what's called a JSON object. And a JSON object is very common in most programming languages. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And it's basically what a context in feel is. So it's a key value map. So it uses the curly braces instead of the square brackets. And then it has a key, a colon, and a value. That key can be basically any string. There's a couple limitations around that. I'm not going to get into those specifics in this video. It is in our documentation. And then it has a value. And again, similar to the lists, those values can be any other valid feel type. It can be a number, it can be a list, it can be another context, it can be day, date, time, duration, whatever you need it to be. And then when you're accessing these values, you're going to use a dot. So whatever this variable name is, dot A will return the number 1. So those are the types. And then you can see here we have some Unary-tests. These are very simple sort of logic comparisons that you can use, whether it's equal to, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Come through this documentation, take a look at that. I'm not going to have a lot of the examples here. I feel like this is relatively straightforward, but if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on the Camunda forums. What I really want to call your attention to in our documentation is what you find under that. We have a list of expressions and we have a list of built-in functions for feel. We're going to use a handful of these today in a live demo in our field playground in just a moment, but I want to make sure that you know where to go in the documentation to find this information. So of course, with all of our documentation, we have an introduction. Feel free to read through this. But I really like the way that we've broken our documentation up, where it's broken up by the data type that you're working with. So if you're working with a Boolean, a true-false value, we have our Boolean expressions here. Or let's take a look at our list expressions. We're actually going to use the filter here in a moment. So let's take a look at the filter documentation. So the filter is for list A, we're going to have condition C, and it's going to return another list of values that match. So for instance, we have a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're looking where the item is greater than 2, and so that returns 3, 4 as a list. Then we also have down here control flow. This is important. These are if statements, if else statements, if you're familiar with a little bit of basic programming. So if some sort of condition is true, then we're going to do this. Otherwise, it means it's not true, then we're going to do that. And this is the particular syntax for feel. Again, if you have a little bit of programming experience, you can see that we don't have fancy parentheses or additional curly braces or indenting or anything like that. It's a very straightforward syntax. And then we have our built-in functions. So these are appear-where expressions. These are our single statements that return a single value. The functions are a little bit more complex. For instance, conversion functions. I have a string, or I have something that's not a string, I should say, and I need to turn it into a string. So we're going to call the string function. And that is the name of the function followed by a parentheses, followed by whatever the particular parameters for that function are. Close the parentheses. You have now called that particular function. So we are going to turn the number value 1.1 into the string, which again is in double quotes, of 1.1. Or we can do the opposite. We can take maybe a string and turn it into a number, and so on and so forth, all the way down the line. And we have, again, this list for everything. You want to do string functions, you want to take a substring, so you're going to return a small portion of a string, then we can use substring for that. We have long list of available functions, so please go in and review these. There are more added, well, I can't say there's more added with every release, but we do add some Camunda specific functions that we find helpful that are actually outside of the feel spec. So make sure that you review these functions here. They are very, very useful. Now, I feel like I've kind of blabbered on and kind of scrolled through the documentation enough. I want to do a real world example here. We have this field playground on the Camunda website. If you search for Camunda Field Playground, it'll come right up, or you can view a link in the description below. And you can give it an expression. You can give it a context, which is data that I know that we just use the word context to describe a data type and field. This context is just the data that this expression is working against. And then you can click evaluate and it gives you the result. So right now it's ignoring this data. We have the expression of 3 plus 3. We click evaluate. That gives us things. We can say 3 plus 3 greater than 10 should give us false because 6 is not greater than 10. And what you see here, the data that we're going to be working with, I pulled out of the Marvel developer portal, excuse me. This was kind of a fun find I had a little bit earlier this year. Turns out Marvel has a massive um, uh, API for pulling down data. Ooh, probably shouldn't show my keys. I'll regenerate those. Um, that has all of the characters, all of the comics, all of the series, all of the creators, so much stuff that you could have access to here. And if you're any sort of nerd or anybody who follows Marvel at all, this is a lot of fun to play with. They have a lot of endpoints here, so I decided to go with this. And what I did was I did a couple queries and tried to find a data set that was kind of fun to work with. And I settled on following the character of Spider-Man, specifically the Miles Morales Spider-Man. This particular data set, if you want to follow along live, is available in GitHub. You can just copy and paste this into the playground, which is what I did here. And again, that link is below in the description. And so let's do a couple quick examples. Um, first, um, first we're going to, let me show you what objects I want to build in the end. I'm just going to copy and paste this out of a document I have off screen. This is not valid field, but this is what the result needs to be. I need to build a field expression that creates this context. I need to have the name of the character. I need to have a description of who that character is. I need to have a number, a sum of how many comics that character is in. I want to have a list of the top creators. So who has been associated with creating stories with this particular character. And I want a list of, we'll say, the top 5. And then I want to grab a list of events that that character has been a part of. I want the name. And then I want to know whether that particular event within Marvel has ended or is it continuing. That's our goal today. These are the field expressions that we're going to try to create. So let me remove this from the screen and let's start fresh. So if we look at the data set, we can see that we have a data object. And again, this is a context. It starts with those curly braces. We have a data object, then we have a name property, and we have a description property. And we already said that 2 of our requirements for our particular field expression are that we are going to have a name and we're going to have a description. So let's go ahead and fill those in right now. The name is going to be data. And I said before that we use a dot notation to access the properties, those keys within a context. So data is our variable name, and we're going to access name as the variable. And down here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do data.description. And of course, you have to have a comma at the end of that key value pair within a context. And we need our closing brace as well. So with feel, I'm keeping this formatted like this. This is a very friendly and readable format, but with feel, it doesn't care if you have it all in one line or not. Again, I'm going to keep it on 2 lines just to make it easy to read. Scroll down here and evaluate it, and let's make sure we get what we want. I think this particular view is a little bit hard to read, so I'm going to copy this out. There's this nice little website called jasonlint.com, and you can paste it in and it'll format it for you. Let me blow that up on the screen a little bit here. So we can see that we get our name of Miles Morales and our description out of the object. Cool. So we've got our first 2 items complete. Now we need to get the number of comics available. In this particular data set, it happens to give us a number of comics that are available. We don't have to do any sort of sum or adding anything up. But I think this is an interesting use case because it shows that we can actually drill as many levels deep into that context as we need to. So we have number of available comics, and we're going to do data.comics.available. Let me double check that path. We're going to go data.comics.available, and we should get 462. So let's evaluate that. We'll scroll over to the end and we have the number of available comics. Make sure you can see that on the screen. The number of available comics is 462. So far, so good. This is very straightforward. This is a very easy way to work with data within Feel. Now let's get a little bit more complex. Let me pull over this particular example and we're going to go through it line by line. Rather than typing it out, I'm going to paste it to save some time, the magic of copy paste. So the requirement that I had was we want a list of the top 5 creators. And if we look at this particular data set, there is a ton of data here. And when we get down, way down, we can see, if I can find it, might have to edit out some scrolling here, my goodness. Here we go. We have this list of creators that's available within. So we have a list of creators and then a list of items, which is each particular creator. And those creators are listed as artists, or they're listed as pencilers, or they're listed as writers. For my particular requirement, I was looking for the story writers. So what we need to do is we need to get a list of all of the creators that are available in this data set. We need to filter it to all of them that have the role of writer. There's a possibility that we might have duplicates in that list because there's multiple lists of creators in this data set for each particular comic series that's here. And then we need to limit that to just 5 of them and then get just their names. We don't want to include this resource URL or their role in our final result. So let's see how we can do that. So one of the interesting things with Feel is you can reference a previous item in a context. This is something that's not available in a lot of other programming languages. So I'm going to create this combined list of creators and I'm going to reference it in the very next property. So we're just going to kind of build this up until we get to our final result. Now let's talk about how we do that. Feel has this flatten function that's available under the list functions, under the built-in functions in the documentation. And you can see that we're only passing in one list or one path to lists. I'm not going to scroll through the data right now. If you scroll through it yourself, you'll see that events is a list, items is a list, creators is another list, and items is another list. One of the magic little bits of Feel underneath the hood is when we evaluate this function, we're using this as a sort of a relative path. And so for every event, for every item, for every creator, for every item under there, we're turning that into a single list. And I know that sounds confusing. We'll take a look at the data in just a moment, and hopefully that clears it up. This is a very convenient command if you have multiple sets of data that you're trying to combine into one easy to work with set. So we're going to flatten that down. We're going to take all of those lists that are available across all the different comics and series, all of the lists of the creators that are available here, and we're going to flatten that and just turn it into a single list of creators. And then I said, we don't want the artists, we don't want the pencilers or any of that for this particular experiment. We just want those that have a role of writer. So we're going to take that combined list of creators that we just created, and we're going to do the filter function, which we looked at briefly in the documentation. The way the filter works is it exposes a variable named item. It's always named item. And that item represents one of those elements of the list. And then you can create some sort of expression inside these braces to say, you know, what you're filtering for. And if this evaluates to true, then it gets included in the list. If it doesn't evaluate to true, then it's not included in the list. And so for each of these, we have a role. I'm sorry, for each of these creators in this list, we have a role, and we want that role to be writer. So we're looking for the item.role equals writer. And so it'll be true for Ron Friends here, but it would be false for Gary Brown because he does not have the role of writer. Next, we're going to take that same list that we already created of only writers, and we're going to run a function called distinct values on it. And distinct values is going to return only unique items in that list. So perhaps Gary Brown shows up 4 times in that list. Only distinct writers will have only one Gary Brown entry in it. So distinct values is going to go through and return only those unique values. Just as a side note, we do have the inverse of this, where you return the ones that are not distinct, or you're returning duplicate values, which can be helpful as well. So now that we have a list of all of our creators, and we filtered it to only the writers, and then we filtered it to make sure that we don't have any duplicates in the list, now we need to get only 5 of them. I didn't put any rules on what 5, so we're just going to grab the first 5 that show up in the list in the data set. The way we're going to do that is with a sublist. Earlier I sort of mentioned the substring function when we were looking at the documentation, which will return part of a string. Sublist does the same thing, only it returns part of a list. So we're going to take that list of the distinct writers. We're going to start at the first entry, and we're going to count 5 of them, and that's going to be our list. So this particular element now has a list of 5 writers out of our list of creators. And then we said we don't want the resource URI. We don't want the role included in our final data set. We only care about their name. So now we're going to take the name and we're going to run this string join function. And so this string join function takes every element of a list and joins it together with something between them. And so we're going to join it with a comma and a space. You do have to include the space. That's a common gotcha. I miss it all the time myself. If you don't have the space, of course, it'll look like this. And we don't want it to look like that. We want it to have that space. So that's why we have comma space as what is separating each element in that string. That was a lot to go over. Let's break that down. Let's take a look at what that particular expression turns out as. I'm going to go back here and format this nice and friendly for us. So first we have the flatten function. And that flatten function takes all of those. Ooh, this is out of order. Let me scroll down a little bit. So here's our combined list of creators. And so this takes every single creator that was available in that list and flattens them down to a single list, as you can see here. Then we take that list and we're going to get only the writers. So we're filtering on the role, and the role has to equal writer. So spoiler alert from before, that was up above. Only writers. So now every single one of these is going to have a role of writer if we scroll through this list. Every single one has a role of writer. And actually, it looks like we don't have any duplicates, so the duplicate function doesn't matter here, but I think it's kind of a good practice to show how you might use it anyway. And so let's scroll down to where that shows up in our data set here. So now we have our only distinct writers. So this is where we ran the duplicate check. Oops, I lost my position on the screen. Hopefully that is quick to find. There we go. Only distinct writers. So again, this took that list of the writers that we had filtered to and makes sure that we have only distinct items. Which scrolling through here, we can see that we have a Paul, Chad, Clay, Jerry, Katie, Mike, Peter, Tom, Christos, David, Dennis, and Catherine. So we have all unique entries across this list. Then we're going to take a random top 5. And again, the way that I said I was going to do that was I was going to start at the first entry, count off 5, and off we go. So we have Paul, Chad, Clay, Jerry, and Katie. And if we look at our list, we have Paul, Chad, Clay, Jerry, and Katie. So it matches the first 5. And then we're going to take just the name and we're going to join it together with a string. And there's our output. That was a lot to go through. I encourage you to maybe pause on this screen, grab this. Actually, you know what? You know what I'm going to do? I didn't have it there until now. The same link that has this data set that is in the description below, I will include these field commands as well, so you can copy and paste it all into the playground. I'll make it easy for you. But go ahead and play around with this, see how it works, or maybe grab your own data set from the Marvel API or from something else and try to do a similar sort of practice on it. The field playground is a great place to experiment with that. The next thing I want to show you with feel is we use these individual variables here, kind of in programming speak. I'd call these like intermediate variables. These first sort of 4 variables here don't really matter. Like they don't need to be part of our process. They're not going to be referenced later on. They were just used to build this particular value. Well, with feel and the magic of copy paste, we can make this a single expression. And let's take a look at what that looks like. So when you combine it into a single expression, you're actually working from sort of the bottom up of that list. So we're going to do the string join with the comma. Here's the closing parentheses for that, just to try to make it slightly more readable here. We're going to do the string join with the comma space on the name of the result of a sublist of the first 5 items of the distinct values after we filter the flattened data list. So we can combine the series of functions and expressions as we need to. We can either use the intermediate variables. It is totally fine to do it that way if you're more comfortable, or you can do something a little bit fancier here. And just to show that this still works, I'm going to hit evaluate. We get the same list of top creators here: Paul, Chad, Clay, Jerry, and Katie. And we don't have the other intermediate variables. This is the entire result because we only have top creators that we've defined. Hopefully that made sense. Now we're going to do a similar thing where we need to get the top events. Again, the magic of copy paste here. And I'm missing my braces, so let's add those real quick. Now, this is an interesting example because instead of it having a function, it actually has one of those control flows. This is a for loop. So what we're saying is top events is going to equal the result of looping through every event in the list of data.events.items. And for each event, we're going to return a context, and that context is going to have an event name, and it's going to be ended or continuing. The event name's easy. That's event.title. You can see that if you go through, I'll give it one shot to find an event here real quick. This is a very large data set. I left it large on purpose to make it interesting to work with. Yeah, okay, so we have events, each of the items in the events, which if we look at here, we're going through data events.items. So that's data events items, and each of them has a title, and that is the event title. And then ended or continuing. Now this is kind of one of those just interesting quirks of the way the Marvel API works. If it has an end value, then it has ended. If it doesn't have the value, then it's continuing. And so if event.end doesn't equal null, remember that magic value from before where null represents anything that's not defined or doesn't exist. So if it is not null, it means it exists and has a value. Therefore, it's ended. Otherwise, it's continuing. So not only can we kind of have those intermediate variables if we want to and feel, we can also chain just a bunch of functions together to get a value. Or we can have a control flow built right into the expression to get a value. And let's go ahead and evaluate this and see what we get here. Let's copy it back over to my little online formatter. Oops, it helps if I paste it. And here we go. So we have a list of top events. Again, it's a list because it has the square brackets. Then we have the curly brace. These are contexts or objects that have an event name of Secret Empire. Is it ended or continuing? It's ended. And then we have another event name of Spider-Verse. And is that series ended or continuing? Both of them have ended in this data set. And now, again, the magic of copy paste. Let's put it all together and take a look at what this final field expression looks like. Paste. There we go. So we have everything that we just talked about, creating that original data set that we wanted. We wanted this smaller data set pulled out of this extremely large data set I got from the Marvel API. We have the name, we have the description, we have the number of available comics. We have our top creators where we joined that sublist, the distinct values, we flattened it and filtered it. And then we also have the top events where we looped through all of the events in the data set and kind of created our own context for each of those that include the event name and whether it's ended or continuing. And again, we have those control flows built right into this expression. We have a for loop and an if statement. And this is our final result. And let's click evaluate. And let's take a look at that final result over here again. Let's validate that. And here we go. Oh, we have a fun little quirk from the copy paste. We ended up with these extra quotes because they're the fancy curly quotes on a couple of these. So I'm not going to waste any of your time correcting that. Just ignore these extra double quotes. Just know that was a quirk of copying and pasting. But we have our top events like we just looked at. We have the name, the number of available comics at 462. We have the description. We have our list of top creators with Paul, Chad, Clay, Jerry, and Katie again. And there you go. So hopefully this demonstration sort of showed you some of the power of feel, some of the flexibility of feel, the way that feel sort of evaluates the data in a way that's different from maybe what you're expecting it to do. But in my opinion, that really helps to make it very powerful and very flexible and very easy to work with within the context of DMN models and BPMN models, especially if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of programming background. You'll have to spend a little bit of time getting familiar with the names and the functions and the formatting. But once you're comfortable with that, it should be pretty smooth sailing going forward. So with that, I'm going to end this video. If you do run into any problems with any field expressions, if you need any help with it, feel free to reach out to us on the Camunda forum at forum.camunda.io. And hopefully you've learned a little bit, and I look forward to seeing your results of playing with feel. Thanks so much.